Alright everybody, welcome to our lesson for today. Today we're going to talk about the transformation of Mexico. So we're going to talk about some changes and challenges that Mexico is going to go through in the 1800s. So our objectives and standards to analyze the difference in rule of Mexico during the 1800s and explain the events of the Mexican Revolution. And our standards there, take a look at them please. Desired result, what changes and challenges did Mexico experience? So Santa Anna. So the military leader who helped Mexico win independence from Spain was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, more commonly known as Santa Anna, his picture there. He helped defeat the Spanish again when they tried to recapture the country in 1829. Santa Anna was elected president of the country in 1833. That was a rule where Santa Anna was constantly contradicting himself, kind of going against things that he promised people. So he would agree to something one day, and the next day he would disagree with it and change his mind. Now, despite his indecisiveness, he was elected to the presidency 4 different times, but he did step down twice to lead the military. Now, Mexico had encouraged Americans to come to the territory of Texas. At this point, Texas was part of Mexico, and thousands of Americans are going to jump at this opportunity for cheap land. But disagreement soon arose between the American settlers and the Mexican government over slavery and religion. Many American settlers brought their slaves with them and wanted to keep slavery in Texas, while the Mexican government was not in favor of that. So this is going to create some real high tension between the people who were living in Texas and the Mexicans. And Texans soon began to demand more independence. They wanted to be more independent of Mexico, and Mexico will deny their request. Now, you may know the story of this or remember this from a U.S. history class maybe you've taken in the past, but a leading American in Texas was Stephen Austin, and he encouraged a rebellion against the Mexican government. Now, Santa Anna took his military north to stop the attempt and won a few battles, including this picture here, the Battle of the Alamo, where the American forces were overwhelmed by Mexican troops and pretty much slaughtered at the Alamo. However, American forces were soon able to fight back, and Santa Anna will be defeated and captured later on. Sam Houston, who was another Texas leader, will release him after agreeing to granting Texas independence. And in 1836, upon returning to Mexico, Santa Anna will be removed from power. However, Santa Anna will regain power, and he will fight against the Americans again. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, or took Texas as a territory for itself. Now, Mexico sees this as an act of aggression, and both nations went to war. So this is the beginning of the Mexican-American War. Now, the war lasted only about 2 years, but resulted in a victory for the United States. As a result of this, the United States received territory in the Southwest and California, what we consider now today, like we said, we have California, Nevada, Utah, parts of Colorado, parts of New Mexico, and parts of Arizona. But you can see on the map there kind of what Mexico gave up there. Now, Benito Juarez. After the fall of Santa Anna, a reformed politician rose to power. Now, Benito Juarez is going to rule completely different than Santa Anna. He was a lawyer by trade, and he worked for a liberal reformed government in the 1840s and the 1850s. And Juarez is going to represent a movement known as La Reforma. So reform. Benito Juarez, that gentleman right there, and his movement called for the redistribution of land and the separation of church and state. He and his supporters also wanted educational opportunities for those who were poor, and unfortunately, Santa Anna will exile Juarez and others in 1853. After the downfall of Santa Anna after the Mexican-American War, he and his reform supporters went back to Mexico. Now, some were opposed to the reform ideas of Juarez. This started a civil war between the liberal thinkers and the conservatives, and the conflict will last for about 3 years. Now, the liberals will finally win the struggle, and Benito Juarez will become president in 1861. Exiled conservatives, so those who were against Juarez, plotted with European powers to take back Mexico. In 1862, French Emperor Napoleon III, he sent a large army to Mexico. France captured the country and installed their own emperor. And Benito Juarez and his followers will fight against the French for 5 years. And after realizing that the struggle was just costing France too much, Napoleon III decided to withdraw his troops and let Mexico have control of itself. Now return to reform. In 1867, Juarez was re-elected as president after being reinstated after the French were there. Continued to follow his reforms as he had promised, and some of those things are promoting trade with other countries and building roads. He also began improving technology for Mexico. And Juarez was very key in establishing an education system that was separate from the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, he died of a heart attack in 1872, but he left Mexico in a reformed state, in a better state. So a change in power. These reforms that have been initiated under Benito Juarez are not going to be very long lasting, unfortunately, because of this gentleman here. In the 1870s, a new leader came to power, and his name was Porfirio Diaz. He was a notable war general who was involved with the Civil War and the fight against the French. Now, for his service, Diaz had been expected to be given a government position by Juarez, but when Juarez refused this, he became opposed to him. So in 1876, Diaz got rid of the president and took control, and Diaz also has a lot of support from the military, obviously being a general, and he obviously has some support from small landowners who were looking for other reforms as well. Now, under Diaz, elections became nothing. So they basically stood for nothing. They represented nothing. He offered land and political favors or power to people who supported him, and those who opposed him were beaten or thrown in jail. And because of these tactics, because of these violent tactics and these promises he made people who supported him, he was able to remain in power until 1911. Now, Diaz did rule as a dictator in Mexico, but the country also saw some progress as well. Some of the things were railroads were expanded, currency became stable, there were some new banks, and there was some growth in foreign investments as well. But despite this success, there were still some problems in Mexico. The wealthy continued to control land, but they did not put it to good use. We begin to see the rise, or the Mexicans, I guess you should say, began to see the rise of food cost, and many Mexicans remained poor or were poor and did not see their situation improve. So because of these things, and because of the kind of dictatorship of Diaz, these problems and others will lead to what we will discuss later this week, the Mexican Revolution. Okay? So please try your best on the questions that follow. Let me know of any issues or concerns you may have. And I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I'll talk to you soon.